Hello and welcome to the 6th episode of the Raceday Review. My name is Joe. I am the NASCAR writer for LineStar, a leading DFS analytics company. Today we'll be going over the Hollywood Casino 400 run at Kansas Speedway. Not the most exciting race in the world until the very end when a couple of cautions shook things up, and even if it wasn't for the it being the last race in that stage of the playoffs, it was okay. So, as always, we'll start by going over the perfect lineup and what our targets were. So, going into this race, I thought there were a couple of things that we needed. There was some magic in the driver starting in the front row, as I mentioned at the end of the last episode when we do the real quick preview. And I had a feeling that something was going to screw us, because normally one of the two drivers in the front row are an autoplay. They're good for at least 70 laps led. And that's where you really want to start building your lineups. And this week that didn't work out very well for us with Hemrick and Reagan starting in the front row. But right behind them were three very fast drivers. Blaney starting third, Keselowski fourth, and Larson fifth. So I was thinking one of the top five were going to lead a whole chunk of laps and be a good dominator candidate. I personally ranked them Blaney, Larson, then Keselowski, because Keselowski has had a history here of qualifying in the top five but not really doing much with it. So he made me nervous, like looking over the model. Keselowski had the best average finish at Kansas, but not the greatest average running position at Kansas, and not the most encouraging finish at similar tracks. Him and Larson were pretty much neck and neck at similar tracks, and Larson had a terrible year in the beginning. Blaney was really, you never know what's going to happen with him, but he did lead a good chunk of laps in Kansas when he started up front, so I thought that gave him the edge. In practice, the average single lap time, Keselowski did have a bit better car in the single lap speed, but Blaney had the better car in the 10 lap average. So again, I thought that was a nod to Blaney over Keselowski. Larson's recent form is what really put me onto him. His practice speeds were terrible. His single lap speed was terrible. His 10 lap average speed was terrible. My gut was telling me that he was going to do better than Kez, and I really thought that he had a better chance of leading laps, which he did. Of those three, I thought one of those three would be a major dominator. Larson ended up being in the perfect lineup with 60 laps led. He missed 14. He dropped 9 spots and he finished 14th, which is not something you normally see in a perfect lineup here. But let's look at the loop data for him. He had 45 fastest laps, and that's where he really made his mark and really picked up a ton of points. He had the most fastest laps out of any driver going. So, besides the one dominator starting up front, I thought that we would need a second dominator. There was one dominator that started 22nd, so that you could be kind of far back in the field and still lead a whole bunch of laps, but I didn't feel like... I thought the top 20 is when you're going to find the second dominator. So that really left us in the position from Hemrick all the way down to Kyle Busch was in the mix. Eric Jones, I didn't think had a chance to lead laps. Of this group, I really thought Truex was going to be the biggest candidate to lead laps and be that second dominator, like a dark horse dominator. He had 22 fastest laps himself, and he also led about 11% of the laps, but ended up being about 33. 33 laps led. So I was on him a little bit, but I was really hoping that he would be our second dominator. So I had a lot of teams that with either Larson or Truex. I played a whole bunch of Kevin Harvick, but we'll get there. And then I thought we'd have one driver that started pretty far up front, but might not pick up too many spots and still do well. Like the guy I picked for that this week was going to be, I believe I had Amarola, who was starting 13th. I thought he had like a 7th place. 13 to 7 would have scored him enough points to pay off his salary and possibly get into the perfect lineup, especially if the likes of Eric Jones just did Eric Jones things and crashed out instead of having the race of the season, or Byron. He was in their price range. He was actually priced much cheaper than them, and I thought he had a little bit of a better floor. Turns out that he ended up finishing 23rd, so that didn't work out well for me. But starting fifth, he had an average finish of 15th. Didn't really pick up an average place differential of 0 here. An average finish at similar tracks of 13th, but he had some great practice times. A weighted single lap average of 8th and a 10 lap average of 12th. I had his range was I thought he had a range of 7th as a floor of 15 and a ceiling of 7, so he missed out on that range. And then this was a really tough week, and there really weren't too many other trends. So what I thought we would need the last 3 drivers to kind of just take what the field gave us. There's a lot of big name drivers starting in the back. We didn't have elite potential to dominate, but did have a nice place differential potential. That did work out well until, again, another late caution. So there was no real... I knew I wanted these first 3 components, and the last 3 we were just kind of feeling what fit. So how it worked out this week was the first driver in the perfect lineup was Byron. Starting 25th, he had actually finished 5th and even led a lap. I'm not going to say that came out of nowhere, but judging by his comps, he didn't run well here in his races here, but you have a couple of bad races and that happens. But even his similar finishing this season as 12th, but remember he qualifies very well at mile and a half, so qualify in the top 5 and then fall back to 12th. So it's not great with the place differential, and he really runs 13th. So he had a decent he had a ceiling on him to an extent, but his practice times weren't really that great. I would say maybe in hindsight, weighting the similar finish more than the actual track history might be a good move. And then the practice speeds weren't really as indicative as how fast some of these cars were. I also had his ceiling as 4th, so he did hit his ceiling from what I projected. His floor is 36, which doesn't really help me. That's a wide range. And his model average was about 26.9, so I had him on average finishing where he started, just about, with a high finish of 4th. He hit his ceiling, or at least as part of my indication of what a ceiling was. But it's just one of those races. Ryan Preece, he's shown a lot of upside, especially the second go around at tracks. I was looking for him to have a similar type of progression last week at Talladega, but you can't really do that when he finished in the top 5 the first time. So even I thought a top 10 would have been okay. But Preece didn't finish well here in the first race here, but I figured he had a bit of a better ceiling. He only finished 25th the last time. He lost 3 spots. Even he hasn't been the absolute best at mile and a halves this year, or at least the similar tracks. because not all of them are mile and a half, because some of them are steep tracks. Like Dover was in the Model N, which is a mile, and then Michigan's 2 miles, so it's not exactly a mile and a half. But again, his practice times weren't fantastic. He just kind of hung out till the end and was able to avoid some of the damage in the last couple of laps, and was able to pick up some spots. Again, he's really finishing the season strong, so he will be a contender next year. Eric Jones, boom and bust. I'm going to start calling him Ricky Stenhouse Jr. He ended up having one of his best races in a very long time. He's off my radar entirely just because he loses me so much money. But starting 20th, he has an average finish here of 14th, usually losing a couple of spots, but running around 12th. Even a similar finish this year of 17th. The top 15 cars starting 20th. No major indication he would finish in the top 10. He picked up a 7th place finish, and I think he added some fastest laps. He had 25 fastest laps, so he had a fast car, or at least he was on the right. He was on the right. Sorry, he was on the right. Pit stop strategy. Jeez, sorry, I had a minute to think about that. I was just looking for the model, see where I had him. Yeah, I had him as a ceiling of 11th, floor of 20th. So I would never call Eric Jones a high floor pick, but the models had him as a decently high floor pick of finishing, worst case scenario, finishing where he started. Hamlin blew the doors off the race, starting 23rd. I really didn't like his speed in practice. I didn't like his history either. So I was, of the big chalky guys, all the big expensive guys. Let me put it in coordination of rate of price. So looking at his price, Kyle Busch was the most expensive driver. Harvick had the best car. Hamlin had a adjusted single lap speed of 10th and adjusted 10 lap average of 4th, but that was 3rd in the expensive drivers and 3rd the expensive drivers. So he didn't have the best car by any stretch. He didn't have the best average finish at Kansas. He was actually one of the worst place differentials at Kansas, and he was actually the worst similar finish of the drivers, the top 4 drivers. So, yeah, I don't really know what to say about that. Starting 23rd, he had a nice floor. I liked the savings that Logano gave him. He didn't have as good of a finish, or similar finish. So now looking over it, Hamlin did have the better car than Logano, but I thought Logano had the better floor, considering that he was starting 29th, and for the $1,000 or the $700 savings. Really? Okay. So that's one thing to learn about. Logano was running in the top 5. Hamlin was still leading when Logano was doing that, but Logano was running in the top 5. So until he got some damage late in the race, he was going to end up in the perfect lineup, but it didn't work out like that this race. Larson went over again, and Chris Buescher I absolutely loved this weekend. I wrote up Menard. If you were part of Line Star, you'll know my blurb on Menard. But this was a very interesting price range, and I thought it fit a very good narrative. You have Menard starting 22nd at 6,900. Buscher starting 26th at 6,700, and then Matt DiBenedetto starting 27th at 76. So DiBenedetto was the most expensive of the three. I loved Menard over because I thought he would go overlooked between Eric Jones, Clint Bowyer, and Hamlin. So I thought that he had a similar finishing position ceiling. Of course, he finished the worst out of the four. But again, he was another driver that was running in the top 10 for most of the race. I want to see what his actually average running position was. His average position was 15th, as opposed to Bowyer's, who was 13th, and Eric Jones, who was 10th. Hamlin, of course, has a great average running position, but a top 15 average run position for a driver at a steep discount to these guys is what I was looking for. I had a little bit more Menard than I had Buscher, and that was because Menard had a much better average finish than Buscher had the better finish than Kansas, but he practiced much better. Menard had the 7th best weighted 10-lap average, as well as the 12th best weighted single-lap average. So I thought he had a better car over Buscher. And DiBenedetto and Buscher were very similar in my eyes. And for the savings, I wanted to try to jam as many guys up front as possible. As many of the expensive guys as possible. So Buscher, I had a lot of Buscher-Menard teams just as a nice base. And then a lot of Harvick. So the lap leaders are Hamlin, Larson, and Truex. We covered them, all of them. There's 7 cautions, 2 of them coming from the stage breaks. The winning lineups, there was the duplicate winning lineup, but not as the same as the perfect lineup. So Kyle Busch snuck in there, and then Parker Kligerman was in there instead of Buscher. So it was a 1v1. Priest was still in there, Jones was still in there, Hamlin. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are 3 different. Byron, Priest, Jones, Hamlin. Yeah, so it was a Larson to Buscher swap. So they paid up for Kyle Busch instead of having Kyle Larson, and they paid down for Parker Kligerman. So they not the same guy won him, but the same lineup won it. So what Kligerman do, just to keep an eye out for it? Kligerman picked up 3 spots, added 1 fastest lap, and that was enough to get him in the perfect lineup. I was looking more at JJ Yeley, who had who picked up 5 spots, picked up 6 spots, but no fastest laps, and the difference was probably no one played JJ Yeley, but I think Yeley actually outscored Kligerman. So give me 2 seconds, let me double check that for you. Yeah, so Yeley actually outscored Kligerman, but so go me, I guess. I hated this range. I wrote it up. There was nothing good in this range happening. And it's pretty much just a hold your nose and Yeley. The reason I was on Yeley, not that I'm happy that I was on Yeley, but you have to pick someone under 6,000 sometimes. And just the price. Let's go over the prices real quick on that. So my options for drivers under 6,000 were LaJoy, who had a decent car, but not a relatively decent car, but not a car faster than where he started. McDowell, who started 6th, Ross Chastain, same thing, and block car compared to when he started. Reagan starting second, no thanks. Castle kind of in the same boat. Tift starting way too high to pay off, and then the only driver back here that actually had a car that practiced better than it was starting was Yelly, and that's the only reason why I liked him, because even Kligerman was, sometimes all that takes to separate yourself, especially with these guys that are so cheap but so bad. Chastain's a great driver. Kligerman's a good driver. LaJoie's better than some of the other guys. I mean, Reagan, you'll hear people talk about Reagan. He's had some big highlights in his career, but when the equipment that he's in now, there's nothing. Castle's after this year has just been absolutely piss poor. So, I mean, there are 11 drivers in this range, and 2 of them are playable, and it's really just a crapshoot. It sucks when you're in a race that you need guys down here, but the perfect lineup ended up not needing anyone, so that's a good, but that's not how a lot of roster construction went. So some notables. Moving on, I mentioned Kevin Harvick's name a whole bunch. The second most expensive driver on this slate, starting 40th. I had him as an absolute lock. I know I faded Hamlin last week, thinking that he was not an absolute lock starting 40th, but again, that was at Talladega, where anything would happen. It's a low incidence rate, a high incidence race. So I was going the exact opposite at a lower incidence race, probably about, I think we had 10 drivers finished more than 5 laps down, which ended up being about 25%, which nowhere near the 40%, the 40-45% that we see at Talladega. And most of that was just because cars were slow and Hamlin was fast, and he just lapped a whole bunch of guys. But with an average finish of 7.4 here, and that's with negative place differential, so he normally starts pretty well. He can dominate. He dominated when he started in the top, and he started first. Not really if he starts outside of that, but I didn't really need that from him. Even with his 9th place finish, he still picked up like 63 points, which was a good day considering. But Byron and Eric Jones picking up fastest laps and everything kind of buried him, and they all scored about the same, so you got a massive price savings by rostering those guys. Similar finish of 4.4. He even practiced great. Again, another driver that was up in the top 5, was racing for the lead at some point, but Hamlin had a stranglehold on it. So run this race 1,000 times. I'm doing the same thing. I played 100% Harvick, but that was my own discretion. Same thing. I recommended him cash game lock without it. Definitely a cash game cornerstone. I had a lot of Harvick and Logano lineups just because I thought that they had a nice floor between the two of them. And then even with Menard and Chris Buescher in there, you could still play like a Blaney as a possible dominator, or if you wanted to get crazy and do Hemrick as a possible dominator, you still had a lot of wiggle room in there. So that's how I ended up attacking cash. Didn't work out too well. So just a couple of notable drivers as we went by. I've had some shares of Hemrick just because the front row is a magical place at Kansas, and you never know. Every now and then you'll get raced at a no-name leads just because he has the clean air. He led like 5 laps, and then there went that idea. Reagan got into trouble real early with Newman, who was my fade of the week, which worked out very well for me as he finished 40th. The obvious fades were Reagan, McDowell, probably Hemrick. I thought that was kind of cheap to decide on that. I had to choose either one of those guys, so I went with a little more nuanced pick of Newman because I didn't think he had any ceiling, considering his average finish of 28th his similar finish at 13th is nice, but when you start 7th, doesn't really help you. He didn't practice very well either. Suarez was running very well. He had a great first stage, he had a great second stage, and then got swept up in some incidents, so that's how he finished 32nd. Austin Dillon really wasn't on my radar at all. Bubba Wallace is Bubba Wallace, so that's never... He spun and his wheel made it a lot further than he did. So you never really know. So I thought Truex was pretty much going to go unopposed to a top 5 and then have to sort it out between Blaney, Keselowski, and Larson. So that's why I thought he had a great chance to lead. I thought he'd just need a couple of laps to catch up to some of the big dogs, and then eventually he'd get them. So that he was really my biggest dominator, my biggest option for a dominator in the top 10 or 11. I was off of Johnson entirely. Just nothing really about him spoke to me. We went over Almirola already. Elliott was racing for his life. He almost caught Hamlin, but he couldn't get there, so a second place finish didn't do him any good. He still got eliminated for the playoffs. Kurt Busch usually runs pretty well here. I thought he was a solid chance of a top 10. Fourth place finish was much better than a top 10. Let me just see where we projected him. Yeah, I projected him as a the ceiling of the second place finish and a floor is 17th. So good run. He didn't with the more expensive driver. He's a weird price point where at that price you need some fastest laps out of him or some laps let out of him, which I didn't think he was going to get out of starting 15th. So it was just awful. I liked Bowman a lot. I thought that he has, with the $400 savings and a bit less, I thought that he also had a top 10 finishing potential. He averaged a top 10 finish here. He's been running great at similar tracks. He practiced not as well as I would have liked. I really thought that he had a chance to finish very well. Sorry about that. So finishing 11th wasn't great. I thought he could finish between 3rd and 16th. So he was like, he's in the same position that Eric Jones was in. That I liked him as a higher floor, but I would trust Bowman's floor over Jones's floor any day. Finishing 11th, picking up 5 spots isn't something to shake your tail at, but Matt Tifft just qualified way too high like he usually does. Kyle Busch runs great at these types of tracks. I thought he was a lock for a top 10, but being the most expensive driver, he actually made it up with fastest laps, so he scored 75 points, which ended up outscoring Harvick. That's why he was in the 2 winning lineups. So it was a solid pivot. Ricky Stenhouse Jr., I thought he was either going to top 5 or bottom 10. He ran 16th. Besides that, I touched on pretty much everyone in significance. So taking a look at the playoffs going into Martinsville, Keselowski was racing very hard towards the end. Chase Elliott did make it. I apologize. I misspoke earlier. Chase Elliott was running second, and it was either Elliott or Keselowski. The reason that Elliott had more points than Kyle Larson or Blaney, but because they were the 2 winners of the previous 2 races, that's why they were safe. That's why they weren't. That was either going to be Elliott or Keselowski going into the final 8. Elliott finished second. Keselowski, I think, had to finish within 11 spots, but he got damage on the late wreck, just like Logano did, and that's how they didn't finish nearly as well as they were running. Byron, even though he did run great in the last race, it was a win, pretty much a must-win situation. Same thing for Clint Boyer, and then Bowman just didn't have enough in him. So the next 3, you have Martinsville, Phoenix, and Texas, so 2 mile-and-a-halfs. So I'm pretty sure Truex and Busch are going to be in the final 4. I really like Larson's chance, and so the fourth guy is going to be. It'd be interesting if it was Chase Elliott. I wouldn't really like it. It might be Logano. Logano likes to get hot in the playoffs. He hasn't really caught fire yet. I think Blaney's definitely the weakest driver. I think Blaney and Elliott are probably the two most likely drivers to fall out quick, and then it's going to be up between Logano, Harvick, and Hamlin, who's going to be in the last spot. And the way that Larson's been going, him at Homestead is going to be something it's going to be a fun race, but we got to get there. We got 3 more races before that happens, and anything could happen. It could be early season Larson, and you can run the high line and catch the wall, and that make things much more interesting. So, just a quick preview of Martinsville. Lots of laps led here. They run 500 laps. Keselowski led 446 of them this year. This is another race that we're going to want to look up front for laps led, or at least one of the guys that we think is going to lead a lot of laps. You can move through the field pretty quickly, so you've got drivers that lead a ton of laps, and then 1 or 2 dominators, and the rest of them are all big place differential drivers. You got 3 guys starting the Fast 20. You got 2 guys in the March of 18 race. That's because you had the dominators spread out. You can either have 3 guys lead more than 100 laps or 1 guy lead a ton. There's really no in between here. So you're going to have to decide how everyone's practicing, how we think everything's going to happen. I'm pretty sure it's an impound race also with a Sunday inspection, so that's going to ruin everyone's morning. But we'll see how that all shakes out. So don't make your double check. You can follow along on Twitter if you like. I'll update it as the week goes on. But I'm pretty sure this is a week that we should be making lineups on Saturday night, because they will update everything Sunday morning once the pre-race inspection occurs. But we see another race with 3 drivers leading more than 100 laps. There's 2 drivers. So we're going to want to look for at least 2 drivers in the top 10, I'd say, that are going to lead some serious laps. And then fill it in around there. It all depends on how inspection goes on. But dominators are a thing. Martinsville's short track. It should be 500 laps is a lot of laps, but you can rack them up quick. And Clean Air was without a doubt the king there. It was a little harder to pass than previous races, if I remember correctly. I'll look into it more, but I think the reason Keselowski was able to lead so many laps, I think what ended up happening was he ended up getting into his teammate and pushing him out of the way, and then the Clean Air just dominated. He didn't have the fastest car that weekend in practice whatsoever, but no one could touch him. If I remember correctly, that was it. He practiced terribly, so I thought it was a decent fade opportunity. But the minute he got into Clean Air, he ran away from the laps, and it got very boring very quickly, especially when he didn't have them. Well, that's everything for this episode. Thank you very much for joining me, and if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out on Twitter, and thank you again.